So hi everyone, I'm Christine. I'm the one from the postdoc from Mark's lab at the University of Cherbourg, and today I will talk about hyperspectral imaging and its application to biodiversity modeling. So in general, I will work at the two open sites here as well as the forested sites, but today I will give you only examples from the forested sites, and partly these can be extended to the open sites as well. And just a few words on the applications of hyperspectral data in general. Here are two examples from the CABE project. In the first one here, we see the best wavelength bands to estimate different trait values, an example from Sean's paper. And the second one here shows that we can also use the distinct reflectances to distinguish between different plant species. So these are very common examples for so-called near sensing methods. So foliar spectra sampled in the field. But when we think about hyperspectral imaging, we more associate the plot level or the community of, level of the plants, like an NS approach, where we try to link spectral diversity to plant diversity. But there have been also attempts to target tree individuals using airborne hyperspectral imaging data, for example, together with LiDAR data. So keeping in mind that we have very spatially accurate hyperspectral data together with precisely delineated tree crowns in the field, I think that we can use the hyperspectral imaging data at different levels of scale. So today I will give you an insight into the processing steps we applied to the hyperspectral imaging data and also some applications we did. The target variables at the forest sites are pretty clear, and I already presented the tree channel diversity as well as canopy traits and their functional dispersion. I also calculated phylogenetic alpha diversity using mean pairwise distances, as well as above ground biomass and its carbon content using allometric equations. But we of course have also the tree species themselves and their respective tree crowns. At the moment we use them to as an abundance to weight the different diversity metrics, but we could also target the trees themselves, or more, their tree crowns. And from the hyperspectral perspective, we're using the two sensors CASI and SASI from the airborne survey, and as already have been mentioned, these covering the visible and near-infrared light in the CASI sensor, and the SASI sensor is covering the shortwave infrared light. So Deep already gave us a more detailed introduction to the data last year, and showed that the new format, the point cloud format, has a higher spectral spatial integrity than more common raster data sets. This means that the spectral points have a higher spatial accuracy. And what we did with these data was, first of all, we were generating a plot level hyperspectral data set. So this is the one here on the top. And we see here, just a second, pointer. We see here one of the crown plots covered by both CASI and SASI. So the visible and near infrared light reflectances, as well as the shortwave infrared reflectances. And each of these blue points is from the CASI sensor and has the reflectances like this here, and each of the red points has the reflectances like this here. And since you see they do not co-align, so we cannot fusion them directly together. And this is the data set that Anna used for her research. But we can also, of course, also generate using the joint data set using the tree crowns delineated in the field. And what I did here is that I averaged all the reflectance data from the CASI and all the reflectance points from the SASI sensor, and average them within each of the crowns, and then I merge them together, resulting in a full spectrum like this one here. But we have to keep in mind not all crowns were covered by SASI and CASI points. So I use that term now for to distinguish just between the two data sets. Therefore, this is of course a reduction of the field data. And we also have to keep in mind that we don't have continuous tree crown delineations. We only have these for the field plots, so we cannot use the second data set yet for predictions. And both data sets have undergone some post-processing steps, including, for example, different filters, such as an NDVI using a vegetation, forest vegetation, non-forest vegetation filter using an NDVI threshold, or shadow, non-shadow filter using a band threshold from the near-infrared. And for the case of the first data set at the plot level, we also have had a flight line filter, which means that some of the plots were overlapped, some of the plots were covered by both by overlapping flight lines. And in that case, we used only those flight lines with a lower off-nadir look angle, which are assumed to be having a higher accuracy. Then we also did some transformations at for the reflectances, and we masked out a noisy region at the end of the CASI sensor, so at the end of the near infrared here, as well as the water absorption bands in the SASI sensor. And then we applied a smoothing and a continuum removal. So the continuum removal was necessary to address reflectance differences between the different flight lines, because they might be affected by different weather conditions, such as clouds or so. And this continuum removed reflectance data has been then used to calculate different spectral diversity indices. And this here shown just like very simple examples. The principal components, for example, the range and the standard deviation has been used. Showing here, the orange plot has a lower range than the blue plot here. And when we add, for example, a third principal component, we can calculate the convex hull volume, which Anna already mentioned. So the green plot here, these are all the spectral samples of one of the crown plots. And the green plot here has a higher volume than the red one, and we therefore would assume that the plant diversity is also higher in the green plot. And we also calculated further spectral diversity indices. I'm not going into detail here yet, because now I like to show you some of the applications of the data. So the first one is just an extension of Anna's work, now showing multivaried models using spectral diversity metrics from CASI and SASI sensors separately. Using the data from the visible and near infrared light and the shortwave infrared light separately, and in addition topographical variables. And for that we used the first data set, since in future this should be used for prediction, and this data can be used for prediction. And what we found here is that the best models or the highest predictability was found for functional dispersion and phylogenetic diversity, explaining around 60% in the variance. We found only moderate predictability for Shannon diversity and carbon content, with about 40% in explained variance. Another application was more related to the theoretical relationships between spectral reflectance data and tree carbon content, and how canopy traits and phylogenetic diversity might influence this relationship. So because this was not meant, this research question was not addressing any predictions, also not in future. We used the data set at the tree crowns here, so the full spectrum, using both reflectance data from both sensors together. And we here use the partially square regression path modeling approach, and yeah, studied the relationships, so the causal relationships between these concepts. So each of these polygons here are so-called latent vectors, which are fitted by other variables, like the spectra are, for example, composed by the mean and the range of the principal components of the full spectrum for each of the plots. The traits, the canopy traits here are composed by the different community-weighted mean leaf trait values. And what we see here is that there was a strong indirect relationship from spectral reflectance to tree carbon content mediated through the concept of traits. And this means that canopy traits are a mediator of this relationship, but not only of this relationship, also as they act also as a mediator between spectral reflectance and phylogenetic diversity. And we also found that topography hadn't a big influence on carbon content here. Last application I wanted to show you addresses now the tree crown scale. So can we classify tree crowns using hyperspectral data? And this, of course, makes use of the continuum removed reflectance values at the tree crown scale, so for each of the tree crowns. And I didn't do any classification yet. I just want to give you an insight here in one of the absorption features in the shortwave infrared light. And these are the majority of tree species from the tree crowns, showing some differences in this single absorption feature. So of course, the ranges of the box plots are influenced by the amount of tree crowns in total, but we of course definitely see some differences here. And when we have a look on this plot here, distinguishing the absorption feature between of all the tree crowns between the two sides, we see a significant difference, and this might be influenced by the fact that at Mont Mégantic are more coniferous crowns. And when we distinguish between the two tree types, we can definitely see also a difference here, which is in line with the literature. So just as an outlook, if we want to, if this data at the tree crown scale, the reflectance data for each of the tree crowns and their respective species makes sense, we could think about using the provincial LiDAR data to delineate the tree crowns in a more continuous way, and use hyperspectral data at the crown level to classify different tree species or tree types. But yeah, this is just as an outlook maybe for future work. And I conclude that in total, there are multiple possibilities to use the hyperspectral imaging data at the forested sites. At the plot level, we found that hyperspectral reflectance and its diversity is more related to functional and phylogenetic diversity. And we've also found that canopy traits act as a mediator between the spectral reflectance tree carbon content relationship. And for the tree crown scale, it would be super interesting to compare the reflectance data from the imaging data, so for the single tree species, with those from the leaf level spectra to see whether it would make sense to go further and try to classify trees using hyperspectral data. Yeah, and Thank you very much for your attention and all your help during the last year with the data and everything. Thanks.